Good afternoon. This is our next CPS network video. Today we have Professor Jerry Mitchell from Baruch College, Professor of Public Policy at Baruch College in New York City. He's been working on nature-based policies and also animal policy. He's currently doing research on park systems from a policy ethnography perspective. He wrote a chapter on policy ethnography in our book on the forthcoming book. It appears merely in days in September, sometime in September, on policy ethnography. And basically, he's going to present today is that chapter plus further reflections on how policy ethnography can be used. So with that introduction, I turn it over to Professor Mitchell.
Thanks, Frank. So I'm going to do an overview of policy ethnography. I assume that some of you probably already know some of these things about ethnography, but we'll go through them anyway, just to set the stage. And then at the end, I want to talk a little bit about the role of artificial intelligence in policy analysis and the role that ethnography can play as perhaps an alternative to an AI world. But before we do that, let's just do a little about policy ethnography, what it is, and how I view it. So policy ethnography is a way to understand the experiences of people, and I would even put into that other species, it involves really four things: information collection, observation, interviews, and interpretation. It's trying to bridge the gap between what a policy says in theory and what it actually does in reality. I think we want to use policy ethnography because it gives us a way to understand a complex society. It can be undertaken in a few months, few days, if you like, to digest what's going on. It provides what is thought of as thick information about policies, how they work in different contexts. It can be applied to every type of public policy at every stage of the policy process. Ethnography is used all the time. When we go visit a city and are tourists, we're essentially ethnographers. We're looking at the museums, we're looking at the culture, we're talking to people, and we're drawing interpretations on what we've been doing. In fact, we're effectively a kind of ethnographer. Obviously, anthropologists have been using ethnography for decades to understand cultures. Sociologists have been using ethnography to understand organizations and group dynamics. If you think about it, when Darwin was cruising down the South American coast looking at fossils, he was essentially engaged in observation, which is kind of effectively a form of ethnography, and then drew interpretations that gave us evolution. Managers and businesses use ethnography all the time. Everything that's in a store is there because people have studied how people shop, to the point of which direction you turn when you walk in the store, where the items should be placed on shelves, what you do when you get to the cash register. All that has been done with people observing people's behavior in businesses. And it's done all the time in schools. The way we evaluate a public school teacher or a university professor is we have someone go into the classroom and observe their teaching and then draw up a report and then discuss that report about what they interpreted from the um, uh, observation with whoever they were observing. So it's a technique that's used all the time, sometimes not even recognized that it's being used all the time. It's used in interpretive policy analysis to understand subjectivity and historical context and look at how people's perspectives. It's focused on social construction and meaning, and how you get to that is through ethnography. I don't think you're doing some sort of quantitative study to answer these kinds of questions. And in that sense, it's a qualitative methodology. As I said, it involves four things, just to briefly go over the four things. Collecting information, observation, interviewing, and interpretation. And when it comes to information, one of the things that ethnographers do is they try to collect as much as they can about the particular public policy. Could be memos and reports and books and articles, legal opinions, brochures, films, pictures, paintings, sketches. They cruise the internet. They look up in Google Scholar. They use AI. They're trying to collect as much information as they can about whatever public policy they're looking at. Then they engage in observation. And in ethnography, you can observe five things. You can look at the space you're in. You can look at objects. You can look at people. You can look at animals, and you can look at activities. And you can try to characterize. When I teach ethnography, I usually try to get the students to look at all five of these things when they're in some particular setting, even though maybe in any particular study, you might not look at all five. When people engage in ethnography, they have a number of ways that they can go about doing it. This comes from anthropology. They can observe people and the people don't know they're being observed. They can observe people where there's no interaction between the observed and the observer and the observed, but the observed know that someone's there observing them. There's moderate where they're, and in fact, that's usually the way they do teaching observations, is that there's an observer in the room, but they're not supposed to interact with any of the students when they're observing the teacher teaching the class. Moderate participation is where the observed know they're being observed, but there may be some occasional interactions. And then active is where the observer is interacting with the people in the observation. So if I were going to go observe a dog run in a public park to understand how the interactions between people is affecting the social dynamics, I very well might be observing what was going on and then engaging in some interviews with the people who are there. And then there's complete participation where the observer and the observed are one and the same thing. This would be if somebody were to disguise himself as a student and go take a class. They decide they were going to become a member of a gang and they join the gang. And then based on those observations, I just read a book about a woman in Italy who went to work in an Amazon warehouse. And so she was working at the Amazon warehouse while observing what was going on. When people are engaging in observations, they try to map the scene. One of the things that you engage in when you do ethnography is to try to figure out where the boundaries are at. So if you're doing a neighborhood, you have to decide where the boundaries of the neighborhood are at. You may do some counting. You might count objects, people, or events. You can take photos, you can make videos and turn it into essentially a documentary. And you can use rating scales. So scales provide you a kind of a grounded way of going about doing the observation. And just to give you an example of a rating scale, here's a rating scale for observing litter. If your policy interest is why are people littering and you want to understand the littering problem, then you could go to a neighborhood or a park or inside an organization and look at the littering to see what's going on. And then you would come up with this scale, and then you'd have a checklist that you go. So in that sense, you can make it a little bit quantitative because you could, then have the frequency of, extremely littered as opposed to no litter. When you're engaging in observation, there are a lot of things you need to think about. There's more than this, but one of the things you have to do, and when you're teaching people to be observers, is you have to be self-aware that you are an observer, that you've essentially changed your role. Your role is no longer just an individual in a setting. You're there as an observer. You have to be conscious of that. The second thing, and one of the more problematic things, is to have patience. When you're observing situations, you can't race through them. It's sort of like going to a museum and trying to see all the art in one day. You have to stop. There's a whole argument that you need to get your heart rate down before you can actually look at a piece of art, or for that matter, anything else. You need to know exactly what it is you're trying to observe, what your purpose is of doing it. And if you're doing it in a team, everybody has to be observing things in the same way. You can't have everybody looking at things somewhat differently. You need some consistency. Although we might like different perspectives, we want to at least have some training about where you're going to be doing the observation, how to assign people to particular places, things like that. When it comes to interviewing, there are two types of interviews that can be done. Ethnographers don't do formal interviews that much. They're much more informal interviews, but you could have some formal interviewing that informs what goes on. Generally speaking, it's informal type of interviewing in which people have a rough set of questions. They then ask the interviewees, and then they engage in conversation with the interviewees, almost formulating the format of the interview. Most of this is in person, but it could obviously be done on Zoom. It could be done by phone. It's obviously best for small samples because it's time intensive, so you're going to spend some time doing it. And then you would draw up from these questions anecdotes, little vignettes that you would then put as a part of your analysis. And then finally, we engage in interpretation, and interpretation could focus on ideas. It could look at history. It could look at problems. It could look at different solutions. It could look at the context, public, private, nonprofit. It could look at the politics of the situation. Oftentimes, you would relate interesting stories. You would identify key themes, and then you would do policy narratives in which you could then see that narrative analysis, which is another chapter in the book on interpretive policy analysis, could be used as a way to understand what the different people were talking about. So these four things: collecting information, observation, interviewing. You could have a study in which there was no observation and interviewing, or one in which there was interviewing and no observation, or you could do all four, but collecting information and interpretation is going to be a part of any policy ethnography study. So I provide some examples in the chapter, but you can just think of any setting, and you could potentially do ethnography, or you could do health-seeking patterns among the elderly. You could look at asylum policies and migrant deportations. You could go into a place in which they're deporting migrants and interview the migrants, interview the people who are doing the deportations. You could do public school performance, go look at a school. In fact, is that when they look at the so-called American charter schools, they've often done this through ethnography. You could look at environmental sustainability practices. You want to understand how people are recycling. You could watch them recycling. You could go look at how people recycle on the curb. So you could, do environmental sustainability. You understand how people use bike lanes in cities. You could interview the people who are riding on the bike lanes. You could interview the people who run the bike lane, the bike distribution system, people who are opposed to the bike lanes, etc. And as I said, you could do dog runs in public parks by understanding the dynamics of what goes on there. The possibilities are limitless in terms of the places that you could go. Well, almost limitless. So, how do you assess whether policy ethnography is a good thing or not? Whether it was done well? One is truthworthiness. Was it thorough? Was it systematic? And most of this is a little bit subjective in its how we assess it. Did it provide substantive knowledge? Uh, was it triangulated? Did it use different sources, multiple methods? Did it have multiple ethnographers? Were numerous theories or paradigms examined? Did the researcher identify their own biases in the consideration of multiple viewpoints? That's the reflexivity. Was it relevant? Was the analysis answering questions that people want to know about in an interesting way? And then was it impactful? Did it actually give us a better understanding of public policy? All very subjective in a sense, but even if we were doing a quantitative study, at the end of the day, we're going to be somewhat subjective in our assessment of whether it was a good or bad study. So these kinds of standards. So if I were in class, I would have these standards. I would give students an ethnographic study, and then they would see to the extent to which they thought the study measured up to these particular standards. Criticisms of ethnography. One is the notion that interviewees are going to be giving you information that is going to be useful. The problem with interviewing people is that sometimes there's the Hawthorne effect. They're going to tell you what they think you want to know. We have a problem in a post-truth society. They may lie. They may be unwilling to reveal things that are personal of a personal nature. The second problem is how much time you should spend in any particular setting. There's no rules here. There's no, guidebook that says, give me a setting and you must spend 3 days there or 3 months or 3 years. And that's really kind of a problem. I mean, the argument, if you wanted to understand a culture, how long would you need to be in that culture to understand it? Which is kind of the problem of tourism. If you go to a city and you spend 2 days there, did you really understand the city or did you need to live there for 2 years? And then finally, there are some settings that are off limits they have gatekeepers. And so doing courts, doing resource management, examining students in public schools, getting permission to do that's going to be difficult to do. And I think you could probably think of other settings in which trying to do this is going to be difficult because you're not going to be allowed to go into the setting. So I think that what ethnography does is it's a mindset. It's a way of approaching public policy. It says that we're interested in the culture of policy. It's a much more inductive than deductive process. We're trying to look at what's going on and then making generalizations from what we see. It's not so much theoretical at the beginning. It's much more applied than theoretical. And it's much more humanistic over a positivistic, a kind of a positive approach to doing policy analysis. In that regard, my last thing to talk about here, which is not in the chapter, which is something I've been talking to Frank about, which I've been thinking about, is what is the role of artificial intelligence in policy analysis? So I think without getting into the ins and outs of AI, I think AI is going to be able to do positivist kind of research, whether it's regression equations or surveys or cost benefit studies or any kind of thing where you collect data and then you analyze the data, that AI is going to be able to do that way better than any person. And moreover, AI will be able to take any study that's done by a positive and critique it. So if you want to take a policy experiment study that and you want to critique that study, just give the study to AI and say, AI, look at the internal and external validity standards, and it will trash it. So you name a graph, a table, a finding, whatever it might be. I don't think any of it, AI is going to be able to do that better than we can do it. And it's really going to go to town on them. It's going to be a really strong critique. What AI will not be able to do is engage in interpretive policy analysis. And in my mind, the interpretive policy analysis, which started out as sort of as a unconventional innovation for policy analysis, is going to become the whole thing for policy analysis, that the only way we're going to understand what's going on is through interpretation, and we're going to have to be teaching people to do interpretation, and AI is not going to be able to do that. AI might be able to look at this, see whether something is a lie or not, but at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones that are going to determine whether it's actually a lie. AI might help us with a narrative analysis, but AI is probably not going to be doing the narrative analysis itself. And in that regard, I don't think we're going to think that robots are going to be doing policy ethnography. I mean, it may come to the point where we've all got a personal robot, but I still think if you're going into settings, it's going to be people going into the settings, observing what's going on. We might use AI to help us code something, or to provide information. The collecting information part may be done by AI, but I don't think the actual ethnographic part is going to be done by AI. And it seems to me that policy analysis as a field really needs to accept the fact that the positivist form of research is going to be all done by AI. I mean, it could be the AI is reading a novel, that AI, when you get a root canal, it could be a robot giving you the root canal. But I think it's very likely that in public policy world, it's going to be done by people interpreting what's going on. And I always end with my dog, because why not? Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Frank, do you want to
Um,
moderate? Yes, please.
I don't know if I'm breaking up.
A little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Well, I
Jerry,
mean,
can you
Piyapong
stop
can do
sharing?
this. Can I stop what?
Jerry, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yeah.
Didn't I stop? Oh, stop. All right.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it stopped.
Yes, perfect.
Well, we're open for questions. One question that I have, was a little bit confused. At one point, you said you could do the ethnography on the phone. That
You
seemed to
could.
contradict the need for the observation. Did I
Probably wouldn't do
understand that?
observations in that case, Frank. You'd just be doing interviews. But you could do some of your
Well, but
interviews
why
on
would-
the phone and some of your things observation-wise. I'll give you an
Right.
example.
But if you just did it on the
I'm doing parks conservancies right now, and I go and observe the park. Some of the people that one of the people that I wanted to talk to couldn't talk to me in person, so I called and talked to them. So, but I still did the observation part.
right, but my question is, if you just did it on the phone, could you call this ethnography? Seems to me that the observing is core.
I don't think you'd have to observe. I think you could just do interviews. I mean,
Then
you
why
could do an
wouldn't we
ethnography
just say it's-
study that was completely interview based with no observation whatsoever.
But why wouldn't we then just say that it's an interview methodology? I mean, what
I
makes
suppose
it?
you could. I suppose you could say that. I mean, I think the difference is I mean, you could argue that it's just informal interviewing. But yeah, I suppose you could say that. I think you would like to see all four things. That would be the ideal. But
Right.
I guess my point was, in any particular study, you could have some instances of where you were, I don't know if the whole study would be informal interview, but you could have some instances where you did something by phone.
Maria raised her
Frank
hands, maybe
disappeared.
have additional point, maybe connected point.
I don't
Maria,
know.
go ahead.
Frank is away. He's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, he's came back. Jerry, very interesting. Thank you. I have some, maybe I have to read more your work. I have some issues differentiating or distinguishing between ethnography with regard to sociology and ethnography with regard to policy, because many examples you have, which are very nice, and of course they are, policy relevant. They can be relevant, I guess, to other sociological questions or issues. Then I was wondering, because I find this observation, the methodology of observation, very interesting, very good. I did also that in my PhD. How ethical or how acceptable is this what you described as how did you call it, non-participation?
Well, I don't, how's it? I mean, if you went to I don't know, we'll use my park example. If you went to a park and you wanted to understand the dynamics of that park, we can make an argument that's sort of sociological. If we went to the park and you observed the people in the park, but you never told anybody in the park you were observing them in the park, and you then wrote up a study about what you observed in the park, would that be, did you need to get human subjects ethics approval before you did that? That would be a little bit of a question. Maybe you should have. But I think that that's the only way you could go about doing it. I mean, I don't know if you ever read this guy, William White, who used to do studies of organizations and cities. You know, he'd send people out to look and see how people sat on park benches. I don't think that they ever mentioned the ethics of, did you observe the patterns of people doing that? But it's perhaps got some ethical issues in it. It's not to the extent of which you're doing it behind a one-way mirror kind of thing. And in terms of the sociology, I think the only difference here is that people say that there's a policy context, but obviously a sociologist could do policy ethnography. I signed up for Google Scholar. I don't know if you can do this. You can have it look for any article that appears on a particular topic. So I do policy ethnography as one. And wow, I get it from all sorts of geographers, just a whole range of different kinds of people who are actually saying, I'm doing a policy ethnography. So I don't think it's necessarily discipline based, but that's a whole issue about public policy. And public policy is kind of an amorphous topic. I mean, what discipline is it? I mean, there's not really a discipline public policy at some level.
Maybe additional point from Pobsook, maybe connected, right? Yeah. Pobsook, you raise your hand.
Yeah, but sorry, I'm not quite sure Maria has finished the
No,
question.
Maria,
Yes.
I wanted to ask Pobsook if it is okay to ask one more question.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, very, 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 very short. I was wondering, because what Frank also mentioned about the phone, is this observation has only to do with visual?
No.
I mean, when I talk on the phone, I observe as well, or?
You could, and by the way, I would add that there's an audio component to observation. I didn't talk about that too much, but You could be listening as much as you are watching. It's not entirely a visual thing. I probably should make that a little bit clearer about that. So somebody with a visual impairment could still engage in ethnography because they could hear what was going on, or for that matter, they could touch what's happening. So you could use other senses just other than your eyes.
Pobsook, do you want to go back on that?
First of all, I have to say something like, so I'm actually a big fan of this kind of methodology. I always love the idea that I have to gain in-depth knowledge from experiences of people, and the thing that you mentioned about other species, that touching as well, because let me talk about something that I observe every day as well in the university, which is about the park at the university, that they have a signpost saying that no pets around in this area. And I always wonder why is no pets, like a pet, because actually in that area, there are so many dogs that can walk in that park, but those kind of dogs, they are stray dogs, and also they are the university dog. And this is something linked to what you mentioned about the cultural aspect of the public policy. That's something that differentiate from one setting to another setting. So to me, I also observe my dog that perhaps he also feel unfair because as a pet, he's not allowed to use university park, while so many stray dogs, they're welcome to use that park. So that's something about injustice that bring to me when thinking about the animal rights in that using the parks in my university. So come to my question that actually linked to Maria, because I somehow would like to encourage my students and encourage myself to use the term policy ethnography. But I also feel like, what is the degree or what is the unique aspect to use that term rather than using the thing like, okay, in my research, in my policy research, I use the ethnography as a method, not the policy ethnography. So I would like to learn from you more about what is the unique or the key aspect of the policy ethnography that allow me to be confident enough to use it in my research project.
I'd say that the use of the term policy ethnography is a relatively recent formulation. I don't know if it's well defined anywhere, other than if you were looking at a culture to understand, I don't know, some social dynamic theory. The difference here is you're looking at something that has a public policy implication to it, or an application to how we're going to solve a problem or come up with a solution to a public problem, which is what, I mean, this is to somewhat the same extent if we could argue about policy analysis. I mean, policy analysis is to some extent based on other disciplines, but we're trying to understand social welfare policy or environmental policy or name our garbage policy. And if we're doing that, we're looking at problems and solutions and perhaps implementation. So that would be, I would say, by the way, on the other species, there's a whole thing about that being around animals changes people's behavior, makes them different when they're around animals. And there is studying canine dogs, looking at dogs that are involved in rescues. I mean, you could do ethnographic studies of that. And then the argument would be is that using animals to solve problems after natural disasters is a policy solution. So that would be in the policy ethnography world, in my mind. I think our problem here is that the boundaries between these things are not so, they're a little bit fuzzy or a little ambiguous in terms of it's not as though you can just kind of put them in a slot and say, well, that's the thing. But you could do the same thing with quantitative methods. I mean, regression analysis could be in multiple disciplines. It's not as though it's centered on one particular discipline.
Could I offer an observation?
Yes,
Uh,
please.
Go ahead.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see any problem with it being like sociology in the field, because to design a public policy, we have to know what's going on. It's not an abstract thing, just say, oh, I'm going to study a policy. Policy requires the input of related to the problem that's to be addressed. And this is what the ethnography does. And I would say its advantages, certainly anthropologists would say its advantages, that it offers a deep or deeper description than, say, interviewing, where you just get some answers from the people. You go behind the answers. You try to see if you can verify and make sense of what's going on by combining lots of information, including telephone calls. I would say that's the main thing. I suppose one could say that we're going to watch now how people respond, ethnographically respond, see how people respond to a particular policy, but that's kind of an abstract thing. But we can see also how people, well, yes, in the field, we can then see all kinds of things about how people act after a policy is introduced.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it kind of got its I don't know if it's being called that, but in an implementation analysis, I don't know if you distinguish implementation analysis from policy ethnography, but essentially looking at how a policy is implemented is, one of the things that so ethnographers could look at, the way a problem is defined by people. It could look at how people react and formulate a solution, or it could look at how solutions are put into practice, or even it could look at how legislative bodies go about approving different kinds of solutions. So
Right.
it could work at any part of the policy process. And I think it maybe at one time the approach was to say that you were doing an implementation analysis or you were doing a problem assessment, but now you would maybe say that you're doing an ethnography at each one of those stages.
Yeah, you could do this. And I would say the goal, normally if you do an implementation study, you interview people and see what they thought and what happened. But an ethnographer who tries to have a deeper description tries to find out what's behind those answers, not just accept the answers at face value. It's
that's why I would think
aspect.
the interpretation part is as important as the other three parts.
It's inherently interpretive.
Right.
Yes, John.
Hi, Jerry. Yeah. So I just have one question. Perhaps
Sure.
this is more of coming from a methodological perspective or point of view, or maybe coming from a more structured perspective or approach towards doing research. Well, ethnography's expectation may be from sociological point of view or from anthropological point of view. They would argue and frame that when we go to the field, it's the time where we frame our question, or rather say, let the data speak to you. What is the real inquiry that you are trying to figure out when you go to the field? Now, my question here is that how do we position ourselves as researcher? Do we raise the question before we go to the field? Or at the same time, do we need to have that kind of conceptual and theoretical kind of framing before going down to the field? Perhaps it's a kind of a question that also links to the overwhelming data and overwhelming information observation that we need to handle when we go down there. So what's your perspective on this matter?
Well, I would say that, people obviously start out with some kind of purpose. They're not just, meandering about. So they start out with a purpose, and then, which I would argue that, all research, even quantitative research, is iterative. You're starting out with one thing, but then you find other things, and you find other literature, and then you find, as you're going along, you're crafting it as you're going, as it's proceeding. I think the difference here is that it's acceptable because it's an inductive process to, in fact, engage in uh, uh, an evolution in how you're approaching the topic, as opposed to starting out with a theory and then staying with that theory and then, trying to see if you can prove it through hypothesis testing. I don't think that's the approach here. And I don't think, while there are probably independent and dependent variables, I don't think we're so, fixated on trying to isolate what those are, nor do we need to come up with a whole list of hypotheses. In that sense, it's a much more fluid kind of approach. Now, you could make an argument that fluidity makes it a little hard to get a handle on when you get too much data about what to do. But then, I think you would draw themes and try to fit things into those different things, which is what is done in narrative analysis to a certain extent. So that's probably an ambiguous answer about something that maybe is not as structured as we might find in other research endeavors. But to get to the last point, I think we're trying to get an interpretation at the end of the day. We're wanting to interpret what's going on without necessarily some fixed conclusion. I'd say, we're engaged in a discourse here, and that it's not as though study, conclusion. It is much more a discourse-based kind of methodology.
My special interest is on your last point that you mentioned, the role of the AI, which is very critical point. I totally agree that in the future, we don't need a traditional way of conducting research based on positivism or naive empiricists, as AI can take over already. So it's very important for us to create this platform and convince other human beings to shift away from conventional positivism to a more interpretive orientation, which is very, very critical point that I can take away for today. Any other question or any
I
point
just,
of
to
yes.
reemphasize that,
Mhm.
reemphasize that point. I think that, we're moving pretty fast here into an AI world, and
Yes, yes.
it seems to me that policy analysts, I think the traditional form of policy analysts are going to be like yarn spinners of old, or lamplighters who went around on streets lighting lamps with long poles. I just think they're going to be displaced, and it seems to me we'd be far better off if we recognized that now, as opposed to, we could delay it, but it's going to happen. The fact is that you're going to be able to answer, AI is going to be able to answer any kind of positivist question right now. Really, who do we think would be better at doing a regression analysis, AI or some person? Obviously AI, in my mind. So, and I think that means that ethnography and interpretive analysis is really is going to be the future, and it should go that way.
And critical policy studies at large as well.
Yeah, I
listen.
think critical
Yeah,
policy
yeah.
studies. I think this is I think, I mean, it's kind of an odd thing in that it didn't start out as as a alternative to AI, but I think it's going to become an alternative to AI. And the fact is,
So
if we want to understand how to make AI more ethical, it's not AI that's going to be telling us how to make it ethical. It's
Mm.
going to be people who are going to be doing that. We're going to be analyzing the ethics of AI. I don't think we want AI to turn into some sort of social Darwinist enterprise. I think we'd like it to be something else. Those kinds of ethical questions are not positive questions. Those are interpretive questions.
Yes. Frank, do you want to end the session
Yeah,
today?
yeah. Well, I want to ask you a question. I have trouble here now. Computers. Good. Oh, here, just a second. Regarding time, then the question is, you say it's a matter of time, but what do we know about how much time? And further, if we look at the history of blacksmiths and lamplighters, they all rejected this.
They did.
It wasn't that they said, oh, okay, we're finished. So there would be a kind of struggle about this, right?
I agree. I think there will be. I think there will
You hear
be
me?
there'll be a. I think that I'll go back. I'm saying my age, but uh, there was a time in academia when we moved from typewriters to computers, and and then there was a whole thing about we need to teach students how to do Word Perfect and Word Star and all these word processing programs. And then there came a time when everybody knew all that, and then we said, well, we don't need to be teaching that anymore. So I think that every time you see some change in when there's a technological moment, I think we're probably at the technological moment now. I mean, if you were to take any kind of study right now and give it to ChatGPT, it could critique it for you and critique it better than you could probably critique it. And so I think we're there now. I think that there are going to be some lamplighters and blacksmiths who are going to be going, no, 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 stop. I want to continue on with this enterprise. That's probably the case. But as we proceed here, they're going to find that they're going to be beaten by the machine. And and I don't think they stand a chance.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's going to be them or the machine, and the machine's going to win that battle.
But not on the
To take a
unpacking
related
social
case.
meanings. Go ahead, Frank. Yep.
To take a related case, yesterday I saw Fried Zakaria interview a fellow who studied AI and teaching. And there is now almost no way to know if the student wrote the paper with AI. As a joke, they tried to suggest that maybe you could ask AI to critique the paper. But the bottom line
people are
was,
doing that. They're using AI to do AI. By the way, here is another point I would make that
let me finish the point.
Right now.
Let me finish my point.
Here, go ahead.
Well, in what indirectly supports your argument is that around the country, professors are turning to blue books where you have to write the essay in class, or stand up and present your knowledge verbally, as was the case in ancient Greece. And in Germany, still, unlike in US, a master's degree or PhD has to be verbally defended. I think there's some of that left in the US, but not much. I forget how that works. But a big part here is the presentation and the questioning of the candidate to try to grasp a sense of whether they really understand what they're talking about. But this would not be something that AI, as we know it now, could do.
You
Well,
know,
one of
it
the
seems to
problems
me
was
from
that professors
Go
are
ahead.
used to using AI now, and it makes their life easy.
No, it seems to me that, returning to ethnography, that one of the things that we're going to have to ask students to do is to go into the real world to do their studies, because AI can't go into the real world. And
Right.
you can't use, in other words, if you tell a student to go study a neighborhood or to study littering in the neighborhood, AI can't go study littering in a neighborhood. Only people can go study littering in a neighborhood, and therefore they can't produce something from AI. They are now forced to do it on their own, and so you're forcing them to do original research and to produce original papers. AI might still help them to write the
Yes.
paper, but that's the actual doing it themselves is going to be something that's field work based. And that's another reason why policy analysis courses should be focused on ethnography and not focused on these other methodologies, because what you want to tell students how to do is to understand things on their own and to produce things on their own. So in my mind, ethnography is one of the answers to what we should be doing in universities, because otherwise, if you just want to get AI papers, you can do that all day long.
Mhm.
Well,
Yes.
one aspect
Mhm.
that supports your case is that AI can't know what the neighborhood was like,
Correct.
since neighborhoods are
Exactly.
all different.
I
The
mean,
other
even
thing
if
that
even
AI
if we
can
imagine
do,
someday that we're going to have robots that are going to be escorting us wherever we're going, we're still going to need to take the robot along with us to wherever it's happening. I mean, maybe we could send it out, but I'm not too sure. But that's way down the road. If we're going to, think that we're in a robot completely dictated society, we're nowhere close to that, at least in whatever the short term is.
staying with the criticism of positivism, what AI can do is analyze variables.
And
But the
reams of data,
variables,
Frank. Reams of
yeah, but
data.
the variables don't speak to the neighborhood, for example.
Exactly. That's exactly that is the point. And yeah.
Okay. Okay, to be more sensitive to contextual knowledge, situational condition, and social norm, meaning embedded into the real world. No? So I think it's gonna be the end of today, 1 hour already. Jerry, do you want to have the last word to
I
end the
have to
session?
leave. Bye-bye.
Okay, Mary.
Thank you.
Bye, Maria.
Thank you very much.
Nice to
Thanks.
see you.
Nice to see you too. Bye.
Well, thanks everyone for the conversation. I think that's in my mind, that's what we should all be about. We should be about having a discourse, and this is exactly the frame that we should be using when we're looking at public policies.
Okay, thank you as well, Jerry, and other
Well, thank you.
participants. Thank you,
Thanks.
Frank,
Good to
Pobsook,
see you, John.
Olga, and Noe
You
John.
too.
Have a good day.
Pobsook, bye-bye. I'm going to
Bye-bye.
send you an
Bye.
article, Pobsook, by the way.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.